comfort you and calm you down and let you rest now. The woman in your life, she can rest so easily. She knows everything you do because the woman in your life is you. The woman in your life knows simply what is true. She knows a simple way to touch, to make.
Hello everybody, and welcome to Women's Spaces. My name is Elaine Holtz, and I am your host today. And I just want to remind all my women listeners that we are into March, and we are celebrating Women's National History Month. And I don't know if many of my listeners know this, but actually Women's History Month started right here in Sonoma County by a woman by the name of Molly McGregor. So I'd like to acknowledge Molly and thank her for all her effort for bringing this very important event for women across the country. And here she is, a young woman right here from Sonoma County. And today I am extremely excited about the interview that I'm about to do. And the woman that I'm going to interview is Helen Rudee. Now, I don't know, some of us are really familiar with Helen Rudee, and some of us are not familiar. So I thought I would just give you a little bit of background as to who this phenomenal woman is. And to me, she is truly phenomenal. First of all, she held 17 positions as a chairperson for many, many boards here in Sonoma County. She was also the first woman to chair the Sonoma County Board of Education. She was also the first woman elected to county supervisor, and listen to this, folks, the first woman who was actually the president of the Board of Supervisors. She is also has an honorary doctorate of humane letters conferred by California State University and Sonoma State University. I cannot tell you what an honor it is to have her in our studio. And I want to welcome you, Helen. Welcome to Women's Spaces.
Thank you, Elaine. I'm happy to be here. This is exciting.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you. And you know, the whole gist of the program is to try to encourage other women through our history, through our story, to get involved for peace, to get involved for justice. So I think it's really important that we find out a little bit about each other. So let's start out by giving us a little background. Who is Helen Rudee? Where do you come from? You know, anything that you feel inspired to say.
Well, you know, I grew up in the Midwest, little state of North Dakota, which is, when you're living there, you learn to live with the elements, hot in the summer and cold in the winter. And I lived on a farm, which is a wonderful place for a child. As a matter of fact, I was the youngest of a big family. I had 5 older brothers, and so that's a pretty neat place for a little girl to be. I grew up there and went to high school in North Dakota. But when I graduated, my mother had her mother and other relatives in San Francisco. It was after the Depression and the Dust Bowl. We had no money, of course, you know, throughout the country at that time. And and we had no junior colleges. So Mother thought that if I came to San Francisco, I could go to a junior college, was at that time, you know, cost about $5 for student fees. And so I went to San Francisco Junior College its first 2 years. Well, imagine this little country girl went to school on Powell Street in San Francisco, a few blocks up from Union Square. And at first I knew what streetcar I was supposed to take, but I didn't know what direction I was supposed to go, because I'd never been in such a big city. Well, young people learn fast. I loved my 2 years at the junior college, and then went to the Stanford School of Nursing, and met many wonderful friends. As a matter of fact, I met my husbands there. And so that was the beginning of my life.
Was it a unique experience for you coming to San Francisco and going to nursing school? It sounds like your mother was pretty big on education.
Well, she was, and my father was not very well. The winters in North Dakota were extreme, and we had very poor medical coverage in our little town. And so she was determined to get him to a good Veterans Hospital since he was a veteran. And that's when we came to, she, I think, steered me to San Francisco, unbeknownst to me, of course, but I went along with it. It seemed like a great idea. We had visited there when I was just a child of 10 and 11 before the Depression, and I loved San Francisco, so it was not a hardship for me to come out here, which I did. And my mother and father came the year after, so I was really not alone after that.
But it's very interesting that you say that you were the youngest of five. You had four brothers? Five brothers. You were the youngest. How did that play into your life, do you think?
Oh, it was great. It was great. I had a wonderful time with them. I learned to live with them. I learned to appreciate men as such, boys and men, and their worries, what they thought about, how they had to get along. And I think that it was a lesson all its own to live with five boys.
You know, it's interesting because, you know, I have a granddaughter, Caitlin is her name, and she has an older brother. And I'm telling you, she is one tough cookie from growing up, you know, having an older brother.
Yes.
So after you finished nursing school, you say that you got married?
Yes, yes. I married a Stanford medical man, and that was the time of the war. We spent a year up here at Sonoma County Hospital when it was the county hospital. He was an resident there, and I did my first graduate nursing there. But at the end of that year, he did go back to Stanford for more training, and I went back to work, but I also had my first child then at that point. Then we had to go, and we went east because he had to be in the Army. And we lived in the east for 2-3 years. And
Well,
that was different, too.
What challenges that you had to face? You know, here you were a young mother, all of a sudden your husband's in the Army.
Yes.
And then you're moving back east. What do you think was your your attitude then that helped you to survive something like these changes?
Well, it was a challenge. And when you're young, it was an experience. And you just did, actually, being in the Army, we had more money than we'd ever had before. Because in those days, you know, the residents got $100. I was paid $100 a month as a nurse, you know. That doesn't give you much to live on. So in the Army, we had a little more money. We felt really quite free to expand our way of life a little bit. But then I did go to work at the Red Cross Blood Bank for a period of time, and then I had a second child. It was then that I joined my husband in the East. He'd had to go on without me in the beginning. And so then I joined him. We were in Virginia and Maryland, and they're beautiful states to live in. And I was glad for the experience.
And then altogether you had 4 children.
Yes, I do.
And then you moved back to California?
Yes. After the third, our son was born, we moved back to California. And when we had Elaine, so that we had 4 children. And that was a nice family. Plenty to take care of.
It sounds beautiful. I'm so honored that you have a daughter by the name of Elaine. I happen to favor that name.
Yes.
Anyway, and then unfortunately your husband passed away.
Yes, he did. It was a sudden situation, and that was how it was. And so the children and I carried on. With 4 children, you don't have much time to think about it because, you know, there's the usual things of feeding them, housing them, clothing them. And then school goes on. So it went on. We took a brief break to get away from the first summer to see if we could fill in the empty spots in our lives, and took a trip to Mexico with my a cousin who I was very, very fond of, and another friend. And so we had a jolly good time in Mexico. It was a great experience for my children as well as for me.
But then, as we were talking before, it was stunning to you when you came back from that trip and suddenly you realized, okay, this is it.
Yes.
This is what's before me. Where do you think you got your courage? I mean, what were you drawing on at that time, do you think?
Well, my family were church-going family. They were religious. And I grew up in the Lutheran church back in the Midwest, and that had a great deal of influence. I always, you know, taught that you do go on, and then, of course, you do learn that farming is not easy back there. Ever since I could do anything, I could gather eggs or carry water or things like that. You work as you grow up on a farm, and with 5 boys and appetites that needed to be taken care of. As I grew older, I helped my mother with cooking. My mother and father were both very active in the community itself, and I learned that's what you do. You're part of the community. You do things.
So it sounds like you drew on your spiritual strength. It
Yes.
also sounds like your work ethic was there, was already set in place, and you knew that you just had to move and move on.
Yes.
And then by the stroke of luck, another human being came in your life, Dr. Bill Rudee. How was that for you?
Oh, it was wonderful. I'd known Bill even at nursing school. He was a friend of my husband's. He was also at the community hospital when we were resident. He was a resident up there too, and so we'd enjoyed him. All of us had our whole group of residents up at the county, and I'd known him at school, and so when he knew that Ford had died, he came to visit us, of course. And then he was very helpful we went to Mexico and visited with friends of his there. And when we came back, he was still helpful. And so sooner than later, we found that we had a great deal in common and decided, well, why not? So we were married.
Well,
And he was a great father, too. He adopted my children. He was a great father to them. He said, what could be nicer, getting 4 children in one little basket. It was great.
well, I remember the first time that I really encountered you. It was at a party, and Dr. Rudy was there. And I remember commenting to a friend, there's an old cliche, behind every great man there's a woman. I says, well, in this case, behind this woman is a very gentle, sweet man who was very supportive. So that was a wonderful, wonderful experience for you. And I understand he's just passed away in 1995.
Yes, in the last 10 years. Mm-hmm,
So, but what a gracious life
it was.
you had.
He urged me on in anything I wanted to do. He urged me on to go ahead and do it. He had a very busy medical life, and so he was happy to see me involved, and I did.
Well, now I'd like to move in a little bit into your political life, because you've had an absolutely marvelous political life. I mean, some of the things you've done for this county are just, there's just too many to name, and just naming all the first to me is just incredible. So let's kind of start from what I understand from the information that I'm reading. Is you started out in the PTA, is that true?
That's certainly true. My children went to school, and of course my father had been president of the PTA when I was a little girl, so I remembered that. And then I went to school to help, and I knew I was involved in the PTA. They're always welcoming helpers, and so I stayed with the PTA. All my children went through school while I was involved, and then there was an opening coming up at the Santa Rosa Board of Education, not the county one, but the Santa Rosa one. Alice Zieber decided to retire. She wanted to spend more time with her husband and travel. He was a busy doctor also, and so they asked if I would join them at the school board, and I said yes. In those days, you could, if the board wanted to appoint you, they could. Now you really go through an election type of format, and so I joined them, and it was interesting because no woman had really been chairman of that Board of Education either, and so after 8 years, I just said to one of them, it's time for me to take over. Otherwise, people will think, what have they chosen, if I can't handle that. So they said, well, all right, that kind of thing. There'd never been one before. So I was made the chairman, and that's how it went on. I just started slowly with my contributions to the community in many ways other than just education.
I just want to go back just a second. You
Yes.
said something very interesting. So you were the first chairperson of the Board of Education, the first
Santa
woman
Rosa.
in Santa Rosa. Were there any challenges because of your gender that you can remember?
Not really. I don't think. I think I had a man perhaps run against me, but it was not anything serious. People seemed to be happy with however I was working. There was not much concern The men who were on the board were all Santa Rosa leaders of some kind, bankers, lawyer, people that people recognized. And so there was not much question and not many battles.
Well, it's interesting. I'm thinking when you're talking about all these men,
Yeah.
and there's a line that you told a newspaper at one time that they wrote something, I think, derogatory about you, and you reminded them that you were brought up with 5 brothers. So all of a sudden I'm thinking you on the school board with all these men, and boy, I bet you whipped them in line. That's absolutely wonderful. So did you move? What was your next step after the school board?
Well, certainly, as you say, I remember there was a time when I was in the room with 11 men. All the principals were men. The 2 women had left, and all the principals were men, and so on. But, I was never, having worked with my brothers and having been with them, it never occurred to me that that was anything unusual. Well, my children had all graduated, and I had a dear friend who said, Helen, run for the Board of Supervisors. You can do it, And at that time, we were beginning on the general plan, and I was very concerned about the environment, how the planning was, the sprawl, as we called it. And so I said, well, why not? I mean, if I lose, it doesn't matter. I'm perfectly happy doing what I'm doing,
What year was that?
I ran in the summer of, or the year of 1976.
1976.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I met you when you ran your second term.
Possibly.
But I remember, because I was at San Francisco State, and I remember when you ran, and I remember how excited that we were to think that a woman was going to run for the Board of Supervisors. How was that for you? Because you were the first woman that was elected. Were you the first woman to run?
Yeah, no, I was not. Somebody from West County, Iva Warner, I think, had run before, but she did not win.
So you were the first woman that actually took the seat. What was that like for you, just running as a woman?
Well, it was interesting. I remember one nice man who said to me, Helen, you're a nice girl, but I can't vote for a woman. Girl, I was a 60 at the time, practically. And I'd run into that every once in a while. People just said, I can't vote for a woman. And but enough people who had known me at the Board of Education, because I was free. My children were, well cared for, and I visited all the schools. I met with parents. I was able to give more time than some of the other board members, so they got to know me. And it was a big district, so I had a lot of built-in supporters when I started to run.
I'm going to show this. I want to show my viewers this wonderful picture of you. This is. I remember meeting you, and I remember thinking, oh my goodness, that smile was just absolutely wonderful, And just to think of some of the great things that you've done for this community is just amazing. Can you just go over what was one of your very first challenges?
Oh, that's interesting. Outside of the PTA, well. We were beginning of developing a visiting nurse association, and I had worked on that in the Santa Cruz Visiting Nurse Association when I lived there. And so, and being a nurse, and having done some visiting, I was very pleased to help with that. And so my friend Shirley Hutchinson and I became very active in developing that association. That was one I enjoyed a great deal. Another one that I truly enjoyed was developing volunteers for the Santa Rosa High School District with Honey Panis. She and I, San Francisco had a very active school volunteer program, and I could see a lot of things that volunteers could do. And so Honey and I worked very hard to develop that, and I enjoyed that a great deal.
I just want to comment. It's so interesting when you talk to a woman about politics. It's always the nursing to take care of, the children, the volunteers. There's that emphasis on community and taking care of the children, and that's something that's really big in my heart. I really think the secret in this world to really being successful and having peace and justice reign is if we would just say, is this good for the children? is this going to help the children? Is this going to help the family? So I just want to comment on that because it feels like that was something that you leaned toward. Can you go in, though? I'm just really interested in what do you think was one of the hottest challenges or biggest challenges that came forward while you were on the Board of Supervisors?
Well, developing the general plan. Because you see, before I joined the board, there had been a recall, and two men had been recalled from the Board of Supervisors, Chuck Hinkle, who was the supervisor in my district, and Bill Cordham from the Petaluma area. And though the board at that time said that some of the finances had not been spent properly, or they claimed malfeasance, you know, because you can't recall somebody just because you disagree with them on something. But it's really bothered me because they were both good men, and I knew that Bill Cordham's interest in the environment was just a profound interest, as he has proven it to be still today. He's very interested in conservation and so on. And so I decided that I would not run on the recall, but I would run on the, Chuck Hinkle was going out anyway. I mean, his position was open. And so I just ran against Chuck Hinkle as an ordinary election, not on the recall. Well, I didn't win, of course, and the recall, because that's not what I was trying to do. However, another man did, and he won. So he went into office the morning after the recall had taken place, and he was there for a while. So he was my challenger then. And I remember when I decided, when you're in politics, you know when something is just not right. And we were at a meeting as such, and somebody asked him why he thought he would make a better supervisor than Helen Rudy. And he said, well, because I think that a man my age has far more energy than someone who's almost 60. Well, that clinched it. People in the audience who were 60, you know, sat up straight and said, well, I have enough energy to do that job. So he was a real challenge in that short period of time till he made that statement. After that, people, you know, were very comforting to me, shall we say, and they said, don't worry about it. So, but that was, and then my last term, I had 4 men running against me. One was from the Santa Rosa City Council, and, you know, 3 other very well-known people. And so that was a challenge then, but I still came out on that one.
You know, it's really interesting. That's another good point that you bring out that always makes my hair stand on end.
What's that?
You know, because when all of a sudden we're women of 60s, you know, and all of a sudden, you know, throw them out in the pasture, they don't have energy. I don't know, we have a lot of energy. I mean, you still have a lot of energy. You know, time is really, really running away, and I want to flash this picture on the screen, and I want you to just explain this picture a little bit to our listening audience.
Oh, well, Helen Putnam came on the Board of Supervisors 2 years after I had come on. And she's well known in Petaluma, of course, having been in the school system as well as on the city council. And Don Head, who was head of the transportation department in Public Works at that time, asked us to work on getting these new buses designed as well as in place and running. And so when we finally had them all colored and ready to go, he wanted us to have our picture taken with a new bus. And that's when these new tri-colored buses came on the road for the Sonoma County transportation system. And we were quite pleased. People loved them. The buses now do everything. You know, they bow, they get down so wheelchairs can get on, and are really very good. Made a big difference. I think we need more public transportation, really.
Well, people,
because we have so many senior citizens. One of them is me, you know, and we shouldn't be driving as much as many of us do, and so we need the transportation. And so we were pleased to be part of that.
Well, you know, people take everything for granted. You know, we think that the buses are always here, this is always here, and it wasn't. And it takes a lot of planning.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just really briefly, how did you end up getting this Doctor of Human Letters? What was that all about?
Well, I served on the Sonoma County advisory board. That is an advisory board to the president. It has no state jurisdiction at all. He invites people to sit, and you help him face some of the problems, whether they're social or educational or whatever, building, with him. And actually, I was I was invited, shall we say, to that position in 1979, long time ago. And so I served until about a year or two ago when I finally resigned. And so during that time, of course, the president, Arminiana, was very aware of all the other volunteer things, as you say, chairman of 17 or whatever it was, and in the community. And also the university was in my district, so I was very interested in its welfare there. And so that's how I think that came about.
So they honored you.
Yes.
You know, time is going by very quickly, like I said,
Yes.
and it's just been an absolute delight to talk to you. I know that we can go on and on and on, but what I'd like you to do is just go and look at the camera and take a minute, I'll give you the signal, to go ahead, just say anything that's in your heart. The whole idea of the program is to encourage women to get involved in politics, for peace, for justice, to just do a little bit. So anything you feel inspired to say, just look at this camera, Helen. And
well, you know, I was really on the board when the Women History Project started, and very pleased to know Molly McGregor and join her group when it started. I think my heart is still with politics and getting women involved in politics. We are so needed there because we bring another side of the story of life to making decisions. Since we make decisions, the board does on women's lives, men's lives, children's lives, and women need to be there to be represented. And so I encourage to get started just at a lower level if it frightens you. But you'd be amazed how much most women, I'd say all women, have to offer to government, whether it's local, state, or federal.
well, I couldn't have said it more beautifully. And from the bottom of my heart, Helen, Rudy, I want to thank you for being here on Women's Spaces. I want to thank my audience for listening. And once again, this is Elaine Holtz with Women's Spaces, reminding you that if each one of us just did a little bit for peace, for justice, a little bit to make the lives of our children better, just think of what a wonderful, wonderful world it would be.
The woman in your life will do what she must do to comfort you and calm you down and let you rest now. The woman in your life, she can rest so easily. She knows everything you do because the woman in your life is you. The woman in your life knows simply what is true. She knows a simple way to touch to make you whole now. The woman